the question of like definition of success.
Yeah.
I remember my goal in life was I want to buy a Louis Vuitton bag with cash.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my goal.
Yeah.
And so I finally got to that point where I was like, I'm going to do it.
Yes.
And I had enough cash saved and I bought this bag and I hate it. Like
Yeah.
one, it's just also, it's a very,
I hate it for her, actually.
It's a very impractical bag, but I carry it
Yeah.
because it's a reminder of like,
Wow.
it's not, it didn't fill that void. It didn't make me more successful.
Right.
And it didn't make me feel better about myself.
Wow.
And so I carry it because it's like a very expensive bag.
Yeah.
But it's also, to me, every time I put my stuff in it, it's a reminder.
Wow.
And I'm like, it's not about the money and the value of things. Like
Yeah.
life and business is so much more than that.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Indie Young Professionals podcast, where we help 18 to 29-year-olds be great adults. We're going to interview leaders throughout the city of Indianapolis and talk to them about some of their successes and failures so that you can learn from them as you walk along this journey of life.
Welcome back to another episode of the Indie Young Professional Podcast. We are back again with Krystal Brown, Carly Rush,
Hey.
co-founders, CEOs, presidents, prime ministers of Radiate 60 Hair Collective. Amazing
business
entrepreneurs
cards.
in our city. Yeah. Put that on your business cards. So this is our second episode of this conversation. So make sure you go back and check last week's episode. This one we're going to talk about, you guys mentioned kind of in the last conversation, generally, the value of learning how to fail and also how kind of your definition of success, of what success means in your life has changed as you've just gone through some life and stuff. So I think those are two super valuable things. And I told you before, we're going to just get like specific, which means kind of personal on some of this stuff. If you could just kind of serve everybody in that way, I think it'd be powerful, because I think those two things are, I mean, we're all thinking about those things all the time. You know, we don't take a risk because we're scared of failing. We feel discouraged because we're not succeeding. And I think sometimes, I know that for me, especially when it comes to success or really failure too, like the definition of success is so ambiguous. I just know it's not what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
I don't know what it looks like, but it's not what I'm doing right now. But I want to ask you about this failure stuff, what you've learned about failing, because and what have you learned about what fits in the category of failure? Because I think we can think, well, it didn't go like I planned, so I failed or whatever. So maybe we'll start like professionally, and then maybe we can even get personal, because I think the personal one, personal and professional, it wrecks us inside, on our insides in different ways. So maybe let's start professionally. I don't know which one of you wants to go first, but what's something you look back on in a professional sense that there was failure or it didn't go the way you wanted it to go, and it just kind of forced you into a corner on like, what am I going to do now? Where do I go from here? How do I handle this?
I can start. It's fresh on my mind.
Go for it.
I am a people pleaser. And so I feel like in my people pleasing, this has never been it was in the early stages of doing hair, or now, like, it's just been the whole entire time. And that's something I'm really trying to be better about. But I've found, like, working with, personally in a salon I've owned, if I try and please everyone all the time, it's losing sight of what the purpose is, or it causes confusion. And so for me, something I've learned working, along with Krystal is when I try and please everyone else, like, it causes a lot of rift between Krystal and I, and it doesn't allow us to do our best.
Yeah.
And so that's always been something that I think that I've carried along, and from, even at a young age, just always wanting to please people, but realizing like it's messing up kind of everything sometimes. And even trying to be so kind, but it causes, like, the honesty is lost sometimes, if that makes sense.
So are you talking about that a lot in the context of being a leader in the business, like with employees or, I mean, with other stylists and stuff, but just as a team leader, as a business leader, maybe that struggle between, like, maybe culture, clients, employees, being healthy yourself, having boundaries, all of those types of different things, those can be in conflict a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, and it's really, it more comes down to kind of that fear of man, and wanting to please everyone. So they're just happy. Instead of letting people kind of go through their own emotions about things, it's like going straight to, well, how can I make you the happiest so you don't have to go and experience being unhappy? So that's I would say professionally that for me.
So how are you learning to navigate it? Like, is it I don't know, is it learning how to prioritize different things at different times? Like what's something you've learned about how to navigate that?
I would say I am one that I can get really confused really fast. And so I think if I am starting out my day confused or flustered, like it really comes into relationships. So I kind of don't think before I speak, I would say. And it can be bad and it can be okay, but it's not great, I don't know. And it's not on purpose. And that's the thing that I always struggle with. I'm like, when I try to explain myself, I'm like, it wasn't on purpose. I promise it just came out. But I think because like, I want to be someone who loves people, but then it comes out in not a structured, great way, especially working alongside of a partner, and my friend.
Who is not like that.
Who is not like that, but it's okay. I mean, but Krystal, that's the blessing in being with Krystal, is that she has been able to give me a lot of grace, but we work through that all the time. And it's all the time.
Yes, totally. So the communication thing's pretty big.
Huge.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like, with like that, when you're working alongside someone that has, kind of a different personality, in that there has to be a lot of grace and open communication, and you always have to assume the best in someone too. Because I feel like when you let your mind go to the worst, then it's that rabbit hole and it's hard to dig yourself out of that.
That is so true.
Yeah.
So true. What about you, Krystal, kind of professionally, crossroads that you've hit?
Yeah. So the biggest one that comes to mind is leaving my last job to start Radiate 60. How do I say this? I tried my best to do everything the right way, and was trying to be very honest. And I was hoping that they would assume the best in me, and they didn't want to believe that my side of the story. And they actually fired me that day. So what I had thought, or how I thought it was going to go, did not. And, that morning when they said, you have to leave now, I thought years of friendships were lost. I was like, man, financially, my clients, like, what am I going to do with this? Because I hadn't prepared to leave that day. So again, it was kind of that crossroads of, I can turn and be malicious and fight them on this and do things, in a kind of the norm of that industry in a malicious way. But then it was, I had to stick to my morals and my values, and I was standing on truth of like, no, I did this the right way. They chose to act a certain way. And so I had to make that decision to continue gracefully and honest. And I didn't know what was going to happen that next day. I mean, I worked at her little house salon in a corner with some pallets built up, and just like, I hope my clients show up. I didn't know who was going to come, but there was a lot of just trust. But I had to stick to my morals and my values, and just hope for the best.
Wow. So what happened? How long were you at her house and stuff before Radiate 60? How long were you hoping?
3 months.
Was it in June?
It was in June.
We didn't open until November.
Okay, so June to November.
Full months.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it worked out.
It was perfect. It was and the right clients, I mean, I had built enough trust and relationship with certain people that I didn't even have to, because that was kind of the thing, is I wasn't allowed to reach out to people. And so I respected that, and I didn't reach out to people, but people reached out to me. And almost all of my clients found me and chose to stay with me. So I think sticking to like that honest and integrity, it worked out for the best.
That's so good. That's so good. So just something I'm listening to as you guys are talking about coming up to crossroads, and I think this is true in general. Most of the time when you look back at something that was even legitimate crisis in the moment, or at least felt critical, or this is make or break, it seems like for the most part, when you look back, you're like, it worked out.
Yeah.
Or something. I just I kept going. I stuck to my guns on what I needed to stick with.
Yeah.
And here we are. And that never
Yeah.
makes it easier to go through, but there's some weird kind of like pseudo encouragement
Yeah.
that like whatever this is, I'm going to get through it.
Yeah.
And we'll look back and move
Yeah.
on kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about maybe personally, like moments you've come up with, because I'm like kind of a who am I? I'm not who I thought I was, or I am doing something I never thought I would do, and that's messing with my kind of internal identity, or something happened to me. Like,
Yeah.
I know I've found myself there many times, and that, like, I think it just goes along with life not going the way I thought it was going to go. I'm like, anyways, I'm not even going to go on that.
Yeah.
But what have been crossroads moments like for you, for the both of you, in that kind of internally on the who am I, what am I about, I didn't know I was going to end up here type of moments?
I mean, for mine, my biggest one, I've always have searched for, like, I've always had this hole of wanting to feel loved. And so I've always had that emptiness. And I got married super young to someone I barely knew. And that marriage failed. And so I would say that was like my biggest failure that kind of like was this catapult into a bunch of other small failures, because from that I felt like I lost so much identity and so much confidence that I started just making other bad decisions and trying to find that happiness and joy in other people, and drinking, and I was doing drugs and all of these things at such a young age, and then still trying to raise a child, and so I feel like that one failure just kind of set me on this like really dark path of constantly trying to fill this void, and that honestly was not filled until I met Jesus and had a relationship with him. And so when that hole was filled, then it opened my eyes like, oh, I don't have to live in that darkness anymore and try and fill that. And so I was able to start making better decisions because I had that hole filled.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine's a lot along that same lines of, I was someone too, like like all of us, we're wanting to be loved, and we want to feel connected, and we're always searching for that. And so for me personally, I remember though experiencing the first time, like I knew I wanted to be really successful, and so I chased after money so much, and I was working at a place that was just, it was wonderful, like at the time, but it was around everyone who was very wealthy, and I saw all the things that they had, and was just like, that's what I was wanting. Like it was like the next thing, it was like, oh, that car, like I really, like, I'm going to work so hard that I can buy not one, but two of those cars, and started really like feeling uncomfortable in my skin. But would still though make a choice, and it would take me down a rabbit hole, that was not healthy for myself. It wasn't healthy for our marriage. And then I had clients sitting in my chair, and they were new clients, and they started talking about a church, and I was like really interested, grew up in a Christian home, but never chose to follow Jesus. And then it was like, and then Chris and I were like, let's just go try it. And so we did. And that was the first time, like, I ended up giving my life to Jesus the first day that we like entered into this church. And I'll never forget, because it was the first time that all the things that I was chasing after just didn't seem important anymore.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was like my dreams changed.
Yeah.
And then I ended up having to make the choice to leave where I was working, because it wasn't a healthy environment for me. And it was like, God was so cool, because the dreams that he was like, no, I really do actually see those dreams. And like, I hear you, and I hear your heart, and we're just going to keep on doing this together and keep on moving. So, so ended up leaving, and it was, that for me was such a cool, but scary and exciting. But I was like, nope, this is that bold thing, right. We're just going to do this. So,
yeah, that's so powerful. I think so much of the wrestle of transitions it just in life in general, it forces you to really try to figure out what actually matters, or what are actually my values. What do I actually prioritize?
Yeah.
Because life narrows along the way. It's kind of like, it just does.
Yeah.
And I think failure, conflict, all of these things, it's a consistent, the thing it has in common all the time is like things coming to a head.
Yeah.
I thought this thing really mattered. It's not going the way I thought it would go. Either it doesn't actually matter like I thought, or I need to make adjustments to prioritize it higher. And it's like a consistent narrowing, and that's really scary.
Well, and I feel like even now, the things that I, used to want, like with money or whatever it was, and now even if I could afford to do it, it feels dirty to me in a sense. Like, I don't want to sound like, that's not condemning. It just is literally like, what takes you back to those places, and to stay clear of that, and to stay like clear-headed, you really have to be careful.
So it's funny that you say that, because the question of like definition of success. I remember my goal in life was I want to buy a Louis Vuitton bag with cash. Okay. That was my goal. And so I finally got to that point where I was like, I'm going to do it. And I had enough cash saved, and I bought this bag, and I hate it. Like one, it's just also, it's a very,
I hate it for her, actually.
It's a very impractical bag, but I carry it because it's a reminder of like, it's not, it didn't fill that void. It didn't make me more successful. And it didn't make me feel better about myself. And so I carry it because it's like a very expensive bag. But it's also, to me, every time I put my stuff in it, it's a reminder. And I'm like, it's not about the money and the value of things. Like life and business is so much more than that. And so, if you see that bag, it's just a reminder.
Well, and I think too, like when you work so hard, you go, I deserve this. Or people will be like, don't think about that. Like, you deserve that. You've worked so hard. And I'm like,
I hate that.
No, I literally just, it doesn't feel right. Like, this is not what fills me. And I love that, because I'm like, there's more to life.
I love what you guys are hitting on, because I think what you're saying is so powerful. Even the language you just used, it's not what fills me, or like the bag didn't work. And that comment, those comments have nothing to do about Louis Vuitton bags or whatever cars you're thinking of it, or the
bag.
people who have them. Or it's like, it's so
much more.
Your
than
point
that.
is, it's so not about that. Like, it's that like self-awareness and that internal values of like, so much of our life exhaustion and anxiety comes from chasing things we hope will work. And then along the way, you buy some of the things you thought you wish you could buy. And instead of ticking it off the list of like, I made it, you tick it off the list of like, is actually of the list of things that matter in life. You're like, oh, dang. I had to spend all that money to find out this doesn't matter.
Work.
Like, it's still cool or whatever, but it is literally just a bag. It's actually doesn't do anything for me. That's hard.
Absolutely.
Wow. So let's talk about money some more. What have you learned about money?
That it's not mine.
Well,
okay.
And so when I first started out in this career, I was saying how you have to start at the bottom. I was working for $400 a month, trying to put like food on the table, pay for daycare, and there was always enough in my bank account. And so now, where I'm making more than I've ever made in my life, I don't ever worry. I'm like, you could take all of it away and there's still going to be a provider for me. And so none of it matters. And I think too, like, to try and explain that to people in our industry, and even that we work with, like, we are not making $1 million off this salon. Like, we don't make money from it, but we love it so much because we're like, it's not about that, and it's never been about that. And I feel like that's where our success comes from, is because we've taken money off of it and put people in the forefront. And it's just, it's continuing to be a blessed place because of that.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
What else do you have to say on that? What have you learned about money?
Same thing. I think back to so many times when Chris and I were like, how are we going to afford this? And then we would always just have the money in our bank account. And it was always provided. And that's where we realized we're like God really like cares about us and is providing for us. And so, yeah.
That's so good. And you guys have talked a lot about like giving your life to Jesus. You've mentioned church and everything like that. And, different people listen to this who are whatever their faith or non-faith background is or whatever. But I hear you talking, and this is a consistent thing that I've seen in my life, and even just in the short conversations we've had on this podcast so far, is there's a huge question of what's my purpose, not which you mentioned to me before this all, Krystal, the difference between passion and purpose.
Yeah.
And those are two really different things. Passions can change and all that kind of stuff, but the reason I'm asking so much about success, asking about failure, asking about money, is because I think all of those things are sometimes the only best language we have for, like, I'm trying to define what's the highest value in my life, what's the biggest purpose in my life. And I think that's kind of in a lot of ways what failure is. It's coming up against, I thought that this was my purpose. My identity was in this. My purpose was in this. My success was in this. And it didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. This is either over or there's something more out there. And it's like, I feel like we're always climbing and looking for that. And so you guys have basically been saying that, like, being Christians, knowing Jesus has given you that highest purpose, so that everything underneath that isn't the main thing, so you can always have the main thing. But just I don't even know what I'm trying to ask in that, but, like, I don't know, any thoughts on that? Just the overall thoughts on, like, learning how to get your purpose whittled down. And I think that's just such a big conversation. We all want that. We all want to have our purpose and everything. What have you learned?
I mean, I've always said I've got a million different passions. And if I were to pursue all of my passions, I would have 600 businesses.
Right.
But my purpose is people.
Right.
And I feel like, whether you're a believer or not a believer, if your purpose is people and building up people and encouraging people, like, that's your umbrella. And then everything else can flow from that. And then you kind of check what you're doing, like, to that. Like, hey, is this career, this, like, decision going to build up other people and encourage other people? And if it's not, then don't make that decision.
Yeah. That's good. What about you, Carly?
Yeah, mine has always been just about loving people and having an influence in someone's life that if they're not, especially someone behind the chair, or having someone in our chair, it's like, well, if they're not getting that affection or compassion, like, outside of the salon, like, oh, gosh, let's do it inside the salon, and you're right in front of me, and we just want to love on that person and make them feel wanted and accepted.
So good. What is something you wish you could go back and tell 22-year-old you?
Well,
oh man.
Or what's something you wish somebody would have told you at 22? Or maybe what is something you wish you would have listened to?
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's what I think people were probably telling us not to do what we were doing.
Definitely learned that.
Gosh. I mean, for me, it's like my fault and my, like, whatever the other word is.
Strength
is like expectation of people. And I feel like I had always just expected people to let me down and to not trust people as much. And so I kept everybody at bay. And I feel like if I would have learned to let people love me and let people in earlier, then I would have had more people, like, able to speak into my life. But I was afraid. And so I kept everybody at a distance. So I think if I would have listened or even just heard someone say, like, let me in, I think that things could have went a lot different.
Yeah, that's so good. How do you do that with the reality that people do hurt and disappoint? And I know that, like, since you've learned that lesson or whatever, it's not like you haven't been hurt or disappointed along the way. Yeah. I know, at least for me, or maybe some types of people, that's the thing that can shut me down the most is like, well, I tried and
try again. I mean, because, like I said, like, it takes a bunch of failures to get it right. And then instead of looking at it as a failure, it's like, what can I learn from that relationship? Like, yeah, they hurt me, but how could we have done that differently? And assume some fault too. Like, there are things that, you do as a human being that might offend someone else. And so don't put it all on the other person, but also don't shut everybody out because one person hurt you. There are a million other great people.
Wow. That's a great word.
Yeah. I think for me, it's to have a higher standard of myself, and like being able to say that I am really worth it, and being able to say no to the things that in your gut like don't feel right, instead of just going with the flow. So yeah.
Can you expand on that a little more? Like, what do you mean when you talk about going with the flow and standing up and saying no? What are some no's you've had to learn how to say?
To any temptations, I think for myself, I would say, okay, so like at 20,
so a temptation to not live up to a value that you hold, kind of a thing. Like,
yeah,
is that what
or
you mean
even
when you say that?
Well, even at 20, that was a really big year for myself. From the time I got married till the time that honestly that I like realized that God really loved me. And during that year was my hardest year, I would say, of my whole entire life, of figuring out who the heck am I, and still don't, still working on that. But like for me, it's literally was saying no to, hey, let's go out for a drink, and saying like, no, actually, I don't need that, and I'm okay saying no and not feeling, and even as something that sounds so silly is like putting myself with only friends who swore, or and it led to just other things, so I think just that being able to feel comfortable in my own skin, to know really what was right, but still chose to say yes to things that I knew I wasn't right, but wishing that I had said no, and not having to learn the hard way always. Yeah,
that's so good, because that can be so hard and so scary to be like, I found that in my own life. Once I chose kind of like the overarching values and direction of the way I wanted to go, I found out very quickly that the norm of life was not going to push me in that direction. It was going to try to pull me away from that. And so it's kind of easy, almost in a sense, to decide the direction you want to go, but it's hard to actually do it. And that's when like the yeses and nos matter. And I know I had people in my life along the way, and I'm so thankful for it, just telling me along the way, hey, it's going to be worth it. It feels like that no is going to be really expensive right now, relationally, financially, whatever. It feels like it's going to be expensive, but I've been down the road like at least a few steps farther than you. It's going to be worth it. And sometimes even it's really actually not even that as expensive as it feels. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's actually not. Some things that feel like it costs so much, it actually, a little bit down the road, you're like, wow, that really wasn't actually the biggest deal in all the world. That's so good. Okay, we've got a couple minutes.
Sorry, can I say one thing?
Yes, I want to ask one last question.
Don't feel like you have to be friends with people in your workplace. I feel like that is like a common thing of like, if you're in a workplace and if you feel called to be there, not feeling like you have to do everything that they're doing. Because I feel like that's where people get lost in that people pleasing, or they get swept into that temptation. It's like, you don't have to be those people's best friends, and check your friend group, because you're going to act like the people that are closest to you.
So true.
And so that's a really hard thing to navigate, especially at a young age when you're, really concerned with who your friends are, to be honest and be like, that person's not good for me. And that might be coworkers too.
Yeah. That is so good.
Yeah.
So maybe we can just even say, like, to anybody listening, it's like, you have permission to choose your friends well. I think that that's so significant. Like, people can say whatever they want, but if you're like, I want to head in the direction of that circle, just go do it. Just go do it. That's so good. Okay, we got a couple minutes left, and I'm going to put you on the spot for a short answer to a big question.
Whoa.
So this is this is just totally shifting gears to relationships here. Okay. So you got married at 20. You've been married at 19 years.
Yes.
You said you have 3 kids.
Yes.
You had your first marriage, kid. That marriage that marriage ends. You're now married to Josh. Have an awesome marriage. 2 kids. One of y'all's your first kid. Amazing. I know both of you. Great relationships, and you've worked hard to get there. One piece of relationship advice that you'd give to a person,
like
with our husbands.
Yeah. Like with either marriage or like how to date, just in dating, whether it's not necessarily just a girl, not just to girls. I mean, you can give just a girl advice, I guess, but just what's a big relational piece of advice that you've picked up along the way?
don't go into a relationship thinking that you can change someone. I feel like you think that you can get married and they're going to turn out to be like whoever you want them to be. It's like, no, usually they are who they are, and those qualities are going to stay there. And I think people change and grow, but definitely don't enter into a relationship thinking that you're going to change somebody.
Yeah, that's so good. I think maybe even a filter for people on that is like, behaviors can change and adjust and stuff, but values changing is very rare.
Absolutely.
Very rare.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Something that came to mind was especially once you're married, well, and in any relationship, but how much talking to your husband really matters, and don't assume one thing or the other. Like, talk it out, and even if you argue about it, it's okay, but you at least know where each other stand. That's where Chris and I think a lot of times, even after 19 years, we get that struggle of, did we talk about this? No, we just assumed that that's what it was going to happen, and then it went the bad way.
Like, how have you learned to like initiate the conversations that maybe weren't natural to have? Like, who usually asks it? You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Well, even sometimes, like with my ideas or whatever it is. The bell.
Finish your thought.
I think even if I'm spurting out an idea, if he will just kind of get silent, and then I know, like, okay, like I need to say, like, how do you feel about this? Or that's, so it's generally just being really humble.
Right.
And that's hard to do, but it's worth it. So talking and being humble with your spouse is super important.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Love it. Thank y'all so much. Thanks for being my friends.
Yeah.
And thanks for the life y'all live. Way to go. Keep going. If anybody's listening, just at least go check out Radiate 60. Coolest place ever. Fisher's baddest salon. It's amazing. Y'all are amazing. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Yeah.
Have an awesome day. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Indie Young Professionals podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and then if you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button on YouTube as well as the bell so that you'll be alerted when we release new episodes. You can also follow us on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to know more about us and about the people that we're interviewing, follow us on Instagram at Indie Young Professionals. Thanks. Have a great day.